Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. How's it going, everybody? I am so excited to be here today. I have Wendy Marvin, who is the CEO of Matrix Roof and Home. They are located in Vancouver, Washington. Wendy is also the president of the Roofing Technology Think Tank, also known as RT3, and she is the chair of the National Residential Roofing Committee, the NRCA. Really excited to have you on to Builder Stories. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you, Wendy.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate you having me on. That's great.
Yeah, so why don't you kind of just open it up, maybe, give us a little bit of background, who you are, how did you get into construction and roofing in the first place, and then maybe a little bit more about what Matrix Roof and Home does.
Awesome. Well, so that's always a question, right? When people look at me, they're not assuming that I'm a roofer or that I own a roofing company. So, I actually founded the company with my ex-partner now 18 years ago. I actually came from the healthcare industry, 22 years working at hospitals and all kinds of fun stuff, but had a business background. And so when we founded the company, my business partner was the roofer and I was the business. And we founded the company on things that are really important to us even today still, which is customer service. And, unfortunately, in the contracting world, if you answer your phone and you show up on time for appointments, you're better than like half of your competition. Um, fast forward 2016, 17, he needed to go a different direction. And so I bought him out and, kind of thought I'd be going back into healthcare. And then he just decided he wanted to do a different thing. And I thought, I can't let this go. I love what I do. I love our people. We have about 15 employees, still small, but focused largely on residential. Branched out a little bit, with my NRCA involvement and some of the things that we're doing, the small commercial and different things. But just loving construction in general and helping people and solving problems. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I gotta ask, so you started the business with your partner at the time.
Yeah.
So your life partners as well, or was this?
Yeah, that was my husband at the time, yeah.
Okay, so husband and business partner, and then you had to sort of split all of that is what it sounds like. I mean, that's great to hear that the business didn't sort of go to shambles too. Was that
Yeah.
I hear all the time about mixing business and pleasure, and it can often be there's a lot of risk in doing that. So
Yeah.
was it and I don't have to go too personally, but like, did you find that starting a business together, did that obviously put a lot of strain on the personal relationship as well?
I didn't think so, but, our split in 2016 really was a divorce, and he ended up moving to Florida, and, it just, I never felt like we had any difficulties because of it, but we did eat, sleep, and breathe, the business, and it's hard. We have kids, and so, I think we did a really good job at that. He kinda just honestly went through a midlife crisis and decided he wanted a different life, and when we went through all that, I thought, "Oh, well, he'll keep the business and I'll go back to healthcare," and then he decided to move, and I thought, "I just again, I can't give up on this," and I think the beauty of what happened is we were very much next house, next vehicle, next, grow, 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 money, 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 and when he left, I really discovered our community roots and found, Habitat for Humanity and our local associations. I'm on some other boards, here locally, and just really found our stride as a community partner, which I think is part of why we've survived COVID. It's part of why we've survived 18 years. When things have gone south, our phones still ring because people trust us, and we've got a really large community of people in our area that know us and love us, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, well, good on you for again, like I've said, I think a lot of times going through such a hardship, both kind of at the personal level and the business level, often tends for the business to sort of just get thrown to the side and forgotten about. But it sounds like you really stepped up and doubled down on it and bought them out and took over the business, and the rest is history. So that's awesome to see, Wendy, that you were able to overcome that that huge challenge. I mean, that obviously was not an easy time of your life, and you kept going, and I think it's really neat. I think the other interesting thing here to see is that and I see this a lot. A lot of times, when people start up a business, they may have the trade, the construction side, or they may have the business side, and a lot of times people will sort of just try to put on that other hat, and it can be very, very challenging and ultimately can burn them out. But what you all had was that partnership, where you focused on the business, he focused on the construction side. And I think that's a great way for others, going into this, or if you may have already found yourself owning a construction business, like, finding a partner who can bring, the skill set that you don't have, and you can build that
Mhm.
team together to make sure that both sides of the house are being focused on and addressed. I mean, that is how you can create a very successful business a whole lot quicker than, if you're just going at it alone and having to sort of, keep kind of managing that half of the business, but then learning as you go the other side, it can be a lot more challenging. So I imagine kind of having that partnership up front was very beneficial.
Yeah, and it's really an important part of why I got involved in the boards and NRCA, and I was on Western States for a while too, is, I believe that a lot of really good craftsmen open businesses, but they really don't have the business side, and you're right, they're 2 sides of the same horse, basically, and if you're missing any of those legs, it just doesn't work, or it does work, it works for a while, but I think it's a big thing of, why we have so many failures in businesses in the roofing industry is just that really great people go in with well intentions, and they're good at what they do, but they don't pay their taxes on time, or so I was lucky. When we split, I went to all of the employees and I just said, "Look, here's what's going on. I'm going to be the owner going forward," which surprised all of us. And are you going to stay? And they all stayed. And my operations manager stepped in and became, the chief estimators, and we just kind of went right along and kept going. We were very lucky. But yeah, both sides are very important. And as a business owner, as a business side of it, I also wasn't blind to what was going on out in the field either. And I think that's another part is that even if you are the roofing side or the installation production, you have to have a handle of what's happening. You can hire people you trust, but you have to know about how to do checks and balances.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do when you think about, making sure that you have, the right systems, processes, like just even the right sort of knowledge. I mean, a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know. What
Mhm.
would your recommendation be for someone who, again, maybe they came from the construction side, that's where their roots are, but they're now trying to build the business side. There's obviously that debate, do you have to, have a college degree or have a business degree or an MBA? Like, is that required to be successful as an entrepreneur and a business owner? And I mean, obviously the answer is no. But
Mhm.
what would you suggest, like, for people that feel like they're lacking, or they know that they're lacking in some of those business skills? Are there resources or ways that they can go and kind of, gain that experience and that knowledge without having to, obviously go back to school and get a degree in it?
Yeah, it's a lot. I'll tell you, I'm a class shy of my bachelor's, but it was in healthcare. I actually was in nursing school. And I basically have my associates. So I'm not an educated in terms of the normal word, person. But I think the biggest key to our success was we joined associations. And, if that's your state association, if that's your regional association, if that's the national, which is, the NRCA, that's the place I think you can really get your hooks into some free resources, and then you have to engage, right? It's not gonna come to you. You've gotta go to the events and stuff and attend, and, I know we all love to go to, like, Western States, and it's in Vegas, and it's always exciting and good dinners and lots of alcohol, but, go to the classes and, sit at the Circle Bar down there at the Paris and talk to other contractors. I learned so much from some of these boards that I've been on, or even just getting to know people. And I guess part of the benefit of who I am is that I'm fearless in chatting with people. But I've learned from the guy who put on the roof for the Dallas Cowboy Stadium, and I'm just a little residential roofer in Vancouver, Washington, and people in our industry are just really caring and willing and wanting to help and keep people going. And yeah, so plug into free resources. It could be even your local community college to learn about finance or different things. And then, find some mentors in the industry. I think those are some two really good places to start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we were just at the International Roofing Expo, and just the education that was
Yeah,
provided. I think that was sort of a little bit surprising. A lot of these big conferences and shows, like you always kind of, the big focus is on the exhibit hall and all the vendors and the manufacturers and checking out the new products and things that are out there. But it's like, if you actually want to maximize your opportunity to be at these events, it's making sure that you're showing up early and going to those education sessions, listening to the panel discussions. Like, it's such a great way to pick up so many different, nuggets of information. And when you can hear from others who have been in your shoes, who have gone through
yeah,
the trenches, who have overcome these challenges, like, it's just so invaluable. And I think enough people, don't stop and take the time or understand the importance of, like, professional and, personal and professional development for themselves.
yeah.
And that's where I think, just that focus on education and continually learning and growing. And just because you've been doing it for the last 20, 30, 40 years, however many years, you've been in business, like, and you think you got it down, it's like, if you really want to keep up, you got to keep learning and keep an open mind about, maybe there's a new way, maybe there's a new technology, a new product. Like, it's just so valuable, as leaders and businesses, to stay up to speed with everything.
Yep. Well, and you hit it for me is, you get to talk to that other person that's in the room who they may have made a comment and you're like, "Oh my gosh, me too." And there's always a me too somewhere there. And
No.
it could be where you least expect it. Like I said, these large contractors that, you hope to aspire to be someday, they're willing to share too. But, it could be the guy from West Virginia that you just sit next to and you're like, "Man, I don't know about AI, or I'm scared about technology, or I don't know how to estimate, or I'm looking for a new CRM." And, that's how we found you guys. It's like,
Yeah.
just those kind of conversations are, like you said, invaluable.
Yeah. So one other thing before we go to the kind of the technology stuff,
Mhm.
I'm curious. In a lot of different industries, I see people, where they feel like their competition is, they just they can't collaborate, they can't, kind
Yeah.
of get too close to them, they can't work together. I mean, what would you say, kind of in the roofing industry? What do you think about, when people are competing, in the local markets? I mean, obviously, roofing can be a very competitive arena. I mean, is there that same kind of competitive dynamic where they don't want to work together and share best practices, tips, tricks, help each other, or do you see it more of a collaborative, community?
It's interesting. So when I started really getting involved in this deeply was about 2015, so 10 years ago. And I don't feel like it was as collaborative. I feel like it was a lot of, and even in the women in the room, we really saw each other as there was one seat at the table, and we were going to elbow our way to that seat kind of thing. And then this really beautiful thing kind of started taking over where we realized that we can just make more seats. And I think that, there's a different energy to that where you recognize that, no, I don't wanna talk to my exact competitor in Vancouver, Washington, but, if I have to talk to somebody else in Washington and they're in Seattle, or I talk to people in Portland, or I talk to people in Colorado, we're all fighting the same fight. And it's amazing, business, and how you can get those tools and trades. So fast forward to today, I would say the industry as a whole has really moved towards more collaboration, because I feel like we're this weird, um we used to be this weird little stepchild, if you will, and we of the construction industry, and nobody really paid a lot of attention to it, even though it's such an integral part of the world. And then, then somebody recognized that suddenly now we're recognized to be, and I'm gonna misquote the figure, but it's like an $800 billion industry. And now we've got data coming out of our ears, and we've got, PEs coming, private equity firms trying to buy us up. We've got all these things. And I think people realize that, holy moly, our sleepy little world woke up, and we've got these 20-something-year-olds that are data analytic people moving in, opening roofing companies. And I think that it kinda pushed people over the edge into like, "Holy moly, I need help." And
Wow.
it's beautiful because, again, it's changed our culture, but I love this culture. I've this industry is just an amazing thing to be a part of, wherever you
Yeah.
are.
No, I agree. And for us, kind of, again, this is our first sort of time to go in, to the IRE event. And I mean, just like, you could feel that community. You could feel
Mhm.
like the excitement, the optimism, the desire to work together and improve, and looking for new techniques, new technologies, products. I mean, I think that was like really exciting to be to be there and be part of that. And I think the other interesting thing, what I've heard from a lot of discussions, with other roofers is like, we have some of our roofing customers who, like, they have basically given us all their budget templates, everything. They're like, please share this out. They want everyone out there, because there are, again, kind of those contractors who, they don't understand their value, they don't know their numbers, they're coming
Mhm.
in, they're just trying to undercut, and win on price, and they don't realize that they're actually just shooting themselves in the foot, because they can't
Yep.
pay their people what they need. They don't know that they're not making enough money to keep the business going. They're cutting corners. Like, ultimately, like, it's those contractors who are dragging the industry down and creating that bad reputation for everyone else. And so, to the extent that we can help elevate and raise up those people and make them into more credible contractors, I think
Yep.
as the industry as a whole evolves, it's going to improve the experience and the reputation for everyone. So it's they're really doing not just themselves a disservice, but it's hurting the entire industry. And so, to the extent that, like, everyone can learn and grow and become more reputable, more trustworthy contractors, I think it'll have a much bigger impact on the community and the industry as a whole.
100%. They say a rising tide lifts all boats. That's what I keep hearing, and it's so true. And you know what's sad is those guys that are out there undercutting and trying to do it cheap, or buying seconds and just not being good humans. They're one mistake away from closing. And
Yeah.
I opened in '07, if you can imagine the last time we had the huge recession, and we were dumb and young, and but it's interesting to have lived through that a few times now and watched as the boom is great and everybody opens a business, and then things have a little bit of a hiccup, like kind of where we're at right now, and they start to see a slowdown, and they're not able to keep things going. And I think that you've hit it a couple times, but data, man, data, right, is key to
Yeah.
knowing where you are, knowing who you are, knowing what you can do. Small things like having your financials in basic order. I mean, we were able to apply for a PPP loan during COVID in like 2 days. And people were out there trying to create a profit and loss, and that's a lot of scary wasted energy when the whole world was clamoring to get some of that money. So, yep, yep, just
You
getting your stuff in order.
So I'm curious, over the last several years. I mean, obviously you've seen a big shift in technology and
Mhm.
data, and how roofing contractors can really embrace and leverage this to build much more scalable, successful, profitable businesses. Like, how would you kind of describe that landscape? What was it like back in the early 2000s, and how has it evolved? And where would you kind of encourage people who haven't yet embraced technology? Like, what's been the impact that it's had on you personally in your business, and what would you advise them?
It's a freight train. There is no other way to say it. I remember being at IRE in Western States back in the early 2000s and having 3 or 4 technology people there, and a lot of them were people from the roofing industry who were mad because they didn't have a good CRM option and they opened their own company kinda thing. To today, we had I don't know, do you know how many people were at IRE in your it was like a tech area, and there were like 100 of companies there, and, I think it's hard because I like we talked about earlier that the industry is very conservative and slow moving, justifiably so because we technically don't move away from things that work because that's risky, and there's a lot of risk associated in what we do. So we've been kind of the tried and true, companies, and now what's happening is there's a bunch of people entering our industry who maybe aren't roofers, but they recognize the monetary opportunities, and they're coming in with these huge data companies, and they're leveraging satellites, and they're letting people buy a roof online and they don't even see the roof. I laughed about that the first time I heard it, and yet, I have a subset of customers that do that. Basically, we don't ever meet them. They call and say, "We love you, your reputation. You've done my friend's house. Just tell me how much and tell me when you're going to be there." And they don't even live here or something. So I feel like it's a beautiful thing. I feel like to the guys moving really fast, I wanna say slow down because, it's a very risky industry, and the first time you have an attorney call you about a lawsuit, you're gonna wish that you had paid more attention. And to the guys that are still out there using yellow pads, because we still have those in our industry too, I lovingly call them my dinosaurs on RT3. And, I tell them, you got to get going or you're going to get run over because there's just too much going on. Back to memberships, the association, the RT3, that was a real big reason why I got involved with that is, we have an AI guide, we have a technology guide. We're trying to prevent, when a lot of people enter an industry, there's a risk associated with the companies that come in because some want to make a quick buck and they don't want to, I always wanted to be that contractor that if I see you in the grocery store, I'm not gonna have to run from you. And I feel that way about tech companies, right? Like there's a billion of them out there right now, but there's quite a few of them that especially that we've already been through and been hurt by, that if I saw them in the grocery store, they better run. And so, I became part of the team to try to protect some of these smaller companies, newer companies from making the mistakes that I made because you pay $10,000 and you find out a company only has DOS-based photos all of a sudden, and the next time I learn that's an expensive lesson, and so I wanna try to help, keep people learning as they go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you did hit the nail on the head. I mean, there are quite a few technology companies, and again, I've seen a lot of them. They pop up, they go for a couple of years, and then realize that they just can't get the traction, or they didn't truly understand the need or build the right solution. They kind of just go right back down. But
Or they
when
had bad customer service.
Yep, bad customer service, didn't focus on the right things.
Yep.
How with so many options out there, how should people be thinking about, evaluating and trying to find the right technology partners for their business? Like, are there, and you have that guide that's available,
Mhm.
with RT3, which is great, but like, are there any kind of high level things that you can share about like just important, you know, things that you need to look for or any gotchas, like things that you didn't learn, or had to learn the hard way going in kind of because, it can be overwhelming to people to try to decide, well, what do I implement? So any sort of guidance on that would be awesome.
Yeah. So, for me, the biggest thing is that, you can't get away from knowing who you are. So my technology search was very difficult because I wanted a company to be very heavy on the CRM side for me and still have the production. Because I want, you to call my company and my people to say, Eric, it's so good to hear from you. Oh my gosh, I see that we did your roof back in 2013. Are you calling for a cleaning or, that personal touch? And not everybody's looking for that. So, there's a lot of companies out there that didn't have the CRM that I kinda tested and tried and didn't like. So, you have to get nuts and bolts on who you are, what you wanna be. Are you a fast-paced, just a roofing installation company, and you're gonna use subs? Are you not using subs? And then you kinda have to look for your tech stack. We talk a lot about tech stack, but you're gonna look for the companies that you're gonna, partner with. And then second is you have to know that 99% of the time, you guys are an exception to this rule, but salesmen will tell you anything and everything to get you to sign the paperwork, and you have to do some research on your own. And, I always recommend if you take the name of the company and look at their reviews, you will learn so much about a company, and you have to throw, a few bad out and a few good out, but what overall, when you look at something, you're gonna know, even within our industry, there's manufacturing reps that'll go, "Oh, it's great. We signed up with this finance company," and you think, "Gosh, I'm with this manufacturer, and I'm a master elite, and, I can trust them." And it's like they're doing the same thing. They're making agreements and sales, and sometimes they're not vetting. So you gotta ask the questions, you gotta know who you are, you gotta know what you want, and then my biggest mistake, and this was a really profound thing for me at IRE is, you've got to recognize the value of your customer base data, who those people are, what they bought from you, who they are in the community, different things, and you have to own that data. And having tried a few companies that are out there and they're still around, when I went to leave, I got a basic CRV file that was crap that we didn't have. We lost data. We lost 2 years of data of customers that now if you call and you happen to be an install we did in 19 or 20, whenever it was, I don't know who you are like that. I don't give you the same service-based, relationship that I wanted to, and so, yeah, owning your data and knowing how, it's like a marriage when we're great, when we're together, but when we leave, what's that gonna look like? And asking those really hard questions.
Yeah, I was very shocked to learn and to actually go, kind of read some of the master subscription agreements, with some of those other companies out there. Like the fact that like they own your data is just like the most mind-boggling thing I could ever imagine.
Yep,
Like for me, it's like we very clearly state like this is our customers' data. It is your data, not ours. We can't sell it. We can't use it. We can't even look at it without your permission. It is so important this day and age that like you really understand, who owns the data privacy, everything around it, because at the end of the day, especially with, with software companies who are working with, hundreds, thousands of different businesses similar to yours, what are they doing with your data?
yep,
Who, if does that mean that if someone comes in and just pays them a fortune, they're going to just sell your data to your competitor? Like that is so crazy to think that like, and I just couldn't even imagine that was actually a reality with some of these other companies out there, especially these large companies who have been doing this for so long. And so, it was very eye opening to realize that and learn that. So I agree with you. You really need to understand and read that fine print. Whose data is it? And like you said too, I mean, you talked about the importance of, doing the research and knowing, what is the reputation. I mean, it's the same thing that anyone, of your customers, they need to go and they need to research your
yeah,
company. And your online reputation is so important these days. I mean, that's what, has led to, to our tremendous growth. And like honestly, like we only talk to probably like half the people that sign up for JobTread now because they are able to learn so much online from the videos and the testimonials and the reviews and all the content that we put out there. Like, go do your research. You can't just, trust, like you said, like a salesperson is gonna, they're gonna just tell you what you want to hear. They're doing their job, and I hope our team's not. I genuinely believe that like we want to make sure that every customer is a good fit and that we'll
mhm,
be able to get in there and to implement and that it's going to work, because otherwise, we're just wasting our time. We're wasting your time, your money. It's just so much easier to make sure you bring in the right customers. And so I think that, people do need to take the time, to go do their own research, go watch the videos online, go talk to other people who have been, with those companies. Maybe they've been there, they've switched, like why, what happened, spend that time to network. And I think even before, you talked about like the importance of knowing, your own company and your own needs. If you
mhm,
don't know what problems you're trying to solve, then, again, you're going to just kind of sort of stumble around and then finally get sold on something and say, oh yeah, that'd be a great thing, but like was that really an issue?
yeah,
I think it's so important. And when I ran the construction company, like I went and I shadowed every single person in the company and like tried to understand their day to day, their roles. I looked for what are the bottlenecks, what are the things that you're spending your time doing that one are driving you nuts. They feel like they're making you inefficient, non-productive. Like what if I could take away one thing that drives you crazy, what would it be? And like when you go and take the time to understand that, that's going to help you, when you're going on your search, know, hey, here's my checklist of challenges that we're having. Will this solution meet that need? Yes, yes, no, okay. Like so going through that and kind of knowing what you're looking for, I think is really helpful.
processes, 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 right?
Yeah. Eh,
We missed also too though, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, is data. And we talked a lot about that, but we didn't talk about customer service. And to me, that's where you guys shine. And that's where here's a little secret is like if the company that you're looking at is playing well with others, if the company that you're looking at actually really does have open, API in the back end and are willing to try to do what they can to coordinate with the company that's important to you, like say it's Sage or say it's QuickBooks or whatever. Um, and if they're willing to give you training for free and not try to charge you, when you're looking at companies and they're nickel and diming you on the front end and they want to charge you for setup and they want to charge, they're going to do that to you throughout the course of the life. And ultimately, we'd love to kid ourselves and say we're making a choice that's going to, grow with my company from 100,000 to 5 million, and that's probably not the case. But but leaving is painful and retraining is painful, and you wanna if somebody's telling you who they are on the front end, you should believe them.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I mean, evaluating all of the resources that are available to you, from help desk, is there support teams? Can you call in? Are you being outsourced or routed to some other, offshore
Yeah.
entity that doesn't understand the product very well? Like, what are those resources? And I'll say from our perspective, I mean, I think we do a really good job here, but I still believe that people don't tap into those resources as much as they should.
Mhm.
And again, I mean, we don't charge for, support and training and all that. I know some other companies might, which kind of begs the question of, well, is it really like that time consuming that you got to like charge for training? But
Right.
at the end of the day, like, these people, on at least on our customer success team, I mean, like, we only hire people that have experience in construction. They understand what you're going through. They know, the challenges that you're going to have. And we've implemented, thousands and thousands of companies on this. Like, that is an invaluable resource for you. And being able to tap into that person and have them as an extension of your company whenever you have challenges or need help, like, reach out, call into those support teams. Like, again, they have seen all sorts of things and can give you great guidance and advice, if you ask for it and if you want it and you want to learn how others are doing it.
Yeah.
Like, that is just like invaluable. And I think a lot of times that it's hard to sort of quantify or even understand the value of that going into, a partnership with a software technology company. But man, like, that can make the world of difference. And again, just help you, hopefully, skip a couple of those hard lessons,
Yeah.
get yourself set up a lot quicker, for success than having to learn and stumble.
You said it, it's a partnership, and that's what we felt 1,000,000% from you guys. I've had other companies go, "Well, yeah, we don't have an open API because that puts our company at risk." And I'm like, "Well, I used to be in IT, and yeah, I know there's some extra steps you have to do to protect yourself, but that's not very customer centric." Or, "Yeah, we've looked at that and it doesn't work." And it's like, "Well, this is really important to me, so can you help me figure out a way around it?" "Oh, no, we really don't have any solutions for that." And it's like, again, when someone's telling you who they are as a partner, you gotta believe them. And
Yeah.
you guys have always been, "You know what? I don't have the answer right now, but let me figure out what it is." And or, "Hey, we're working on that, and this has to be coming through first, then we're gonna get to that." You guys are just always yes, and let's figure it out. And that's how I am as a company with my customers,
Yeah.
and I just believe in having that different mindset. And I think that the good news is I think that those companies like us, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, companies like us are really gonna be the people that hang around and survive as we as get gobbled up and the PEs and the world changes and all these other things. It's like basic human decency and taking care of each other is what's gonna come back to matter, I think.
Absolutely. And you brought up a really important point. And for anyone out there listening, API, it's an application programming interface. And what that really means is it's the ability to programmatically connect two applications together so that they can share and transfer data, without you having to manually move things over. It's just a really great way. And I think a lot of times too, it's important to understand, like, there is no one silver bullet. There's no like
Mhm.
one, software or technology solution that's going to be able to do every single thing you need for your business. And that's just a pipe dream. The thing that you have to understand is that you have to figure out, what are all of the key technologies that you need. And as you described, Wendy, it's building your technology stack.
Mhm.
And what we also believe here at JobTread is, like, we want to help you create that connected ecosystem of all of the technologies that you need to efficiently and effectively run your business, and making sure that each one of those pieces can connect and interface together is how you create that most powerful tech stack. Versus if you have a bunch of, point solutions that are kind of off in their own silo and they can't communicate, now you're just creating duplicate effort. You're opening up this opportunity for manual, mistakes and fat fingering things. And it actually can create more inefficiencies.
Mhm.
And so I think when you evaluate and you look for these technologies, I mean, again, a lot of the more ancient, archaic, older, technology solutions, if you will, I think, again, like, APIs and this whole kind of, data transfer and working together, that wasn't as much of a thing. And it's more of a more modern, kind of revolution that we've seen with software and technology. And so it's important that you make sure that those possibilities are there,
Mhm.
whether you want to build and extend it yourself, or you just want to know that those companies can work together to create that ultimate solution, for you. It's just such an important thing that I think a lot of people, they don't quite understand as the end consumer how valuable that really is.
Well, and we use acronyms all the time, right? And I'm just as guilty as you are because we're used to it. But, to me, you touched on it, but I really wanna hit it is I reached a point where my intakes, my people answering the phones were entering data into 5 different places. And when that happens, it's slow, it's inefficient, and it has a high likelihood of issues, of mistakes. And
Yeah.
it's not that they're a problem, it's just we're moving very fast, we're a very lean, small team, and those were the solutions that I started going, "Wow, what is this?" And then we started learning about API, and then we got a lot of doors shut in our faces, and then we started learning about companies that are like, "Well, no, we can do API." Yes, it's some work, but we can do that, and to me, that's the company I'm gonna grow with. That's a partner that I'm gonna be with. That's the positive, and I think that's a big deal is to look at your company. It might be running. I'd mentioned the guy I love Steve Little, and this is K-Post Roofing Company that did the Dallas Cowboy Stadium, but I remember having such a, like, tech crush on him and thinking that I wanted to be that company someday, and when we went and toured his business, he had a tech silo where his repair division couldn't even talk to his commercial roofing division. And it's because they chose a company that's siloed, and it's because, and so there's all these things out there that you think it's a small person problem, but it's like this is universal in all businesses, in all industries, and to try to find someone who's gonna help you try to figure it out is key, I think.
Yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting perspective that we've had as well. Obviously we work with any type construction business, from roofing to pool builders to deck builders, to remodelers, home builders, you name it.
Yeah.
We've very intentionally have designed JobTread to be, able to be customized through the content and through your own processes so that it can work for any one of these types of businesses. But I can tell you, having thousands of customers in all these different industries, like the under kind of processes, the fundamentals of managing these businesses, they're all the same.
Mhm.
It's all the same processes that need to be in place. We're doing the same blocking and tackling. You're having the same challenges with marketing and sales and production and providing a great client experience. Like the actual trade is not, as important as, making sure that your systems and processes are set up to work for you and your team so that you can efficiently deliver that great customer experience and that end product that you're selling.
Yep.
I think a lot of people, they just kind of come in and they just keep throwing bodies at problems, and they think, man,
And money.
we're getting bogged down, that, we just need to hire more people, and they just keep bringing in people and people, and they don't take the time to stop and say, wait, let's look at the underlying, like, bottleneck here. What is
Yep.
the root issue? And is there a more efficient and effective way to do that? And that's where, again, for a nominal fraction of a single employee, you can probably deploy some technology into your business that will save you a fortune. It'll make everyone more efficient, versus just continuing to hire people and keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And, that's like the definition of insanity, right? Like,
Yep.
you have to be able to go and find a much better, more smarter and efficient way to operate the business if you want to scale it.
100%. I do have to add the caveat that Steve figured it out. He and his team got their solutions figured out, so I don't wanna leave them thinking that they didn't get it together, but yeah, it is, and it's funny, I say business is business. I've probably learned some of the biggest secrets that I use to keep my business moving from places that were not my industry. So, I'm involved in my community, and I talk about associations. It doesn't just have to be your industry. It can be your chamber of commerce groups. It can be I've learned some really great things from some realtor groups that we belong to, just ways that they interact with customers that I was like, "Huh, I kinda like that. I'd like to pick that up." And so, to me, sitting on a plane, sitting in a bar, there's always nuggets around you. Don't Yeah, you're brilliant.
Yeah.
Don't pigeonhole yourself into any one industry because business is business is business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think that's like one of the coolest things about JobTread is the community that we've been able to create with all these different types of builders and
Yep.
contractors who, they come together, in our online Facebook group, JobTread Pros, or, at our boot camps or our annual user conferences. And like, I can't tell you the number of people that have told me they have learned so much from looking at other types of businesses and other industries, because obviously, you're naturally going to focus on your industry and looking at the same types of businesses, but like there's so many other different ideas that you might not ever thought about when you look at a different industry and how they have figured out ways to become more efficient. And a lot of it really can translate, so I think that's one of the neat things. And again, I think too, when I think about, and I look at like some of the software specifically in the roofing space, like, they've sort of pigeonholed themselves to only be able to work with, roofing. And what we're seeing is a lot of contractors. I mean, you're already out there. You may be looking at the exterior of the home. You might
Mhm.
see opportunities to come in and not only, replace or repair the roof, but like, hey, you got a bunch of rot and siding damage, or you need, these windows or doors, or maybe you want to get, a new deck built, or maybe getting inside the house, doing some remodeling there. Like, I think that's like really where there's a huge advantage that we have over a lot of the other people out there, is that, you can do more than just roofs with JobTread. You can kind of
Agreed.
go and custom build whatever budget and whatever type job you need. Now I also give the caveat, make sure that, if you're going to take on a job outside your core,
You
that
know.
what you're doing, and that you're not getting yourself into hot water, trying to get in and do something that, might be out of your wheelhouse. You want to make sure that you can do a great job with that, and that you got the right people to bring in. But, I think it's a pretty good way to be able to kind of, expand those existing customers.
It's a good fit, and you guys are a good fit, for sure.
Yeah. One thing you've mentioned here, is about AI.
Mhm.
And, obviously that is a huge topic, and a big, focus of a lot of people, both, software companies looking at how do we implement it, construction businesses, how do we leverage it? We got all the, the political landscape looking at how do we manage it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And I know we've talked about it a little bit. And,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on AI? And, do you think that, what do you see the biggest benefits of it today? And what do you think maybe we're working towards, but maybe not quite ready, to fully implement for?
Yeah, so funny that I'm the president of the RT3, and I am a person who leads with caution with AI. I it's necessary. It is here whether you want it or not. So it's one of those things I feel like I need to learn about and focus on and stay on top of, and it's a moving freight train in and of itself. I think the thing that scares me the most about it is regulation. And, every time I tell it to do something, it's taking my information, which is great, and I'm getting something from it. But like we mentioned earlier, that information is available to anybody else who asks that question in that way. And so I worry about, proprietarily keeping my information safe. But it was really profound for me. So I was on another panel that for NRCA where we had roundtable discussions, and then we had a panel where we kind of wrapped that up. And there was a guy in the room who was probably early 30s who came from data management. Never did a roof in his life, never worked in construction before, but he opened a roofing company because he knew data, because he was able to take AI and have the AI program it in a manner that it actually answers their phones and schedules their appointments for them. So, I think it's gonna be a beautiful way for us to have efficiencies within our company. And some companies are gonna delve into, AI and tech and all those things and be somebody that's very different from who I wanna be as a contractor. I know a contractor out of Florida that used satellite imagery and some other things to target and know when there were hail strikes on houses, and was able to go by zip code and walk and knock and say, "Hi, Eric, I'm so and so from so and so, and here's a picture of your house. Here's your bid." But losing that personal touch to
Yeah.
me. And so I think that, I think it's an important part to learn about. I think it's not going away. Um, but I think it needs to be looked at with caution and understanding, and recognize that like any business solution, you have to know who you are and what you want from it, and kind of play from there.
Yeah, I share your cautious optimism about
Yeah.
it. I think there's, again, I use it every day in my life. I think it's tremendously valuable and helpful, and especially, content writing, from kind of being able to just really solve any general problem or question I have. I could either go spin my wheels or I could just, ask, Chat GPT or whichever one. It'll point me in the right direction. I mean, saves me tons and tons of time, but I think at the same time, my biggest concerns are, where people become too dependent on it and they put too much trust and faith in the accuracy of every response,
Mhm.
and so, we get asked all the time, well, is JobTread, do you guys use AI? Have you implemented it? How are you going to implement it? And it's like, I've seen a lot of solutions out there, where, you got AI, takeoff and AI estimating and things like that. And think, what I hear when people are using that is they'll tell you that, it gets them maybe 75 to 80% of the way there, but every single time they have to go and check it and modify it and make changes. And I think, my biggest fear would be, that if we implement this too soon and we create this like, dependency on it where we're now contractors who, again, they don't have all the experience, they don't have, the years and decades of building and knowing all of those things that, that you can't see on the surface. You pull that roof off, what's underneath, you pull that wall, open that wall up, like what could be in there.
Yeah.
My biggest fear would be, to give somebody a tool and then have them go and enter into a project where, they end up losing 50, $100,000 jobs because they sold a fixed price project. And then they turn around and say, well, JobTread told me, that was the
Yeah.
scope of work and that's how I needed to price it. And, again, like that is the last thing I ever want someone to be able to do is point the finger at us and say, well, your AI was wrong. It's like, well, yeah, no kidding. Like, you can't like just, I think a lot of people just want that easy button.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to ultimately lead to a lot of challenges in the near term of making sure that it's accurate and that people aren't, becoming too dependent on it. And then I think it's also, today it's very, very expensive, from like at least from a platform standpoint for us to implement this. Our goal is to keep JobTread as affordable as possible. We've had it at 199 bucks is our base price plus 20 bucks per user. We're going on 3 years now of not increasing our price, and we want to keep it. I'm a very big believer software should be affordable for all size businesses, and a solo owner operator shouldn't pay the same thing as a 50 or 100 person company. And so the last thing I want is to add this, this AI technology where a small group of users can come in and just, hammer it and just jack up, the cost and the expense for us to be able to provide it. So I think we're still also waiting for, the cost to come down a lot more, which I mean, like
Which
every
it
quarter,
will.
it's like,
Yeah.
being halved, so it's definitely moving that direction. But, I think again, there's a ton of potential with it. But I think we got to keep kind of watching and making sure that it's going to ultimately deliver that, that accurate, information that you're going to need to take action. And like you said too, like people are, we're humans, right? I think that human connection, that personal relationship that gets built, I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think
Mhm.
people are going to always want to keep working with humans. They're going to trust people that they can shake their hand, look in their eyes, and give those commitments. We're now people calling in to our support and they're like, are you a bot? Is this a real person? I respond to people on Facebook. They're like, is this really Eric or are you an AI? And it's like, oh, this is me. I don't know how to prove it to you, but like, I think like there's something to be said about, making sure that we keep the brand and the personalities of the companies, the people behind it. People buy from people they like, they trust, that they want to work with. And so, I think we just have to kind of take it all with a grain of salt and really figure out where's the right way, to implement it and leverage it, and where could it potentially have, shortcomings that could cost us.
I agree. I agree. I kept thinking about the legal part of it. I heard so many people at IRE say, "Oh, yeah, I just had ChatGTP write that, section of my contract," and I'm thinking, "Are you crazy?" Like, yeah, they can give you the basics, but again, it's like buying insurance. They'll sell you liability insurance, but if you read the fine print, you can't do more than 3 houses in any one development, or you can't do condos, and or you have a legal conversation and it's like, "Yes, they added this section for you, but it actually canceled out these other 2 sections." So, I think it's a tool. I think it's a really important tool. I think to your point, people wanna buy face to face, and there is a segment that doesn't. And maybe you are a company that can do both of those, or maybe that you choose one or the other and and you really focus on those to be who you are. But I don't think it will ever make up for not having a human involved to make sure. I mean, ever, that's a long word because we're got a long way to go, but, I
Yeah.
just feel like there's humanity and there's some common sense and there's some
Yeah.
referencing in there that just doesn't happen right now, and you can't point the finger at AI and say, "They told me," because as an owner of the company, ultimately, it doesn't matter if Eric Thornberry told me this and I did it, I'm the one that's responsible because I chose,
Yeah.
and you gotta see your business that way.
Absolutely. Funny story. So in our office, we're about to double our office space, but we've got almost right now we're kind of like at a third of the floor, and then another third of the floor. We had a first right of refusal on it, but someone right after we leased our space came in, and it was an AI legal company,
Mm.
and they came in and they basically built it all out. Just awesome looking, suite, all fully furnished, everything. Well, apparently, AI legal wasn't a great idea. They didn't get their funding. It fell through. There were some lawsuits that came out, spooked everyone, and they essentially went under and had to turn the whole space back. Just give it right back to the building. And so we
Wow.
were able to now come in and pick it up, and now we've got beautifully built out expansion space, fully furnished. We're
Ping
getting to
pong
expand
tables.
into it. But yeah, I think it's so important, and again, I hate when I see that a contractor, just assumes that they won't get into legal trouble or it's not going to happen to them, and they don't have an ironclad contract and they haven't, spent the time. I mean, again, this is a nominal drop in the bucket to hire a lawyer to make sure that you have a great contract that is defensible, and that same lawyer who will show up for you and defend you when you need. Because like that nominal expense, that could be the difference between surviving and going under. And it's just like it is just,
100%.
you can't fly blind. You need to have those protections in place. And again, it's just such a sad story to see. And again, like the contractor might not have even been wrong, but their contract wasn't there to protect them. And anyone this day and age can come and sue you for anything they want to, make up under the sun. And that's why like it's so important that you put those protections in place.
Yep. Yep, and you do it the right way, for sure.
Yeah. So, I'm curious when you think about the entire industry as a whole, thinking about roofing businesses, like, what would you say? What do you think the biggest challenges that they face, just in today?
Well, 6 months ago, I would have told you some different stories, but, right now, labor continues to be an issue for us, as with any construction. Paying a fair wage, finding that balance between paying a fair wage and actually charging something that people can afford. We were looking at a roof that we put on back in 2013, and it was about $325 a square, $350 a square, and we're close to $700 a square now, and it is just increases in pricing. COVID hit us and they had all those price increases and everything, and nothing came back down or very little came back down.
Yep.
Um, I think that, I think these tariffs are terrifying. I think that, steel is a huge part of our world. Wood and plywood is a huge part of our world, and, watching during the early 20s when we had our shutdowns and plywood went from $16 a sheet to $65 a sheet. My fear is that if you're one of those guys that isn't a really good business person and you're not watching what you're being charged and what they're telling, because
Yeah.
even the distribution companies are making mistakes, where
Yeah.
they're doing yeah, your price is 25.25 or whatever, and you get your bill and they charge you 40.25 and you're not paying attention, and they're paying that. It's like it takes some extra business acumen to kind of stay on top of all that. And then again, we're bidding out. We just got a price increase in our industry, 6 to 13%. What do I do with that? Right? Is it 6%? Is it 13%? And it comes in 30 days. So what I'm bidding now and 2 weeks ago means that that's the price that the install is gonna be. And so, it is, it's a freight train. And sorry, our clock's going off. And, I feel like that's the other side of it. The good part for me, for roofing, much like any construction, is we are invaluable. We're not gonna go away. We are, we survived during COVID. We were one of the states, Washington, and I think Michigan, were one of the 2 states shut down during that, and they still found a way to keep us going, and, people need houses, people need roofs. It's not gonna change, but you really are gonna have to up your game in how you manage your company because it's not easy anymore, and it's not flow, for
Yeah,
sure.
no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the importance of knowing your numbers,
Yep,
managing your costs, doing the job costing. That is the only way that you're going to be able to catch these mistakes.
yep,
When I and again, this can happen at any time, not just now. But I mean, obviously, there's a lot more likelihood that these things could happen now. But when I first took over the construction business I ran in 2018, I found that for the previous 6 months, we had been doing jobs in this one market where we were actually losing 10 to 12% every single job we did. And I sort of suspected there was like fraud or kickback or something
yeah,
was happening. And ultimately when I dug into the data and the numbers, I found that we were just we had never updated our cost of the material. And again, like we went 6 months of literally paying the customer to put up their project. And like this is where it goes to show like why you have to manage your jobs in real time and put systems and processes in place to catch those issues early. You can't wait till the end of the project, to find out that you just like way underbid it. Like you need to know, hopefully beforehand.
yeah,
But if you find out in the project, I mean, this is where having, price escalation clauses in your contracts, it just ways
yep,
to protect you that like, obviously if it was a mistake on your end and you bid this project and you guaranteed this price, like, and you don't have a way to go back and try to have a change order or do something to recoup it, you may end up having to eat that. But like, don't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. You got to take action. You got to go correct, your catalogs, your pricing, your numbers, your formulas, like whatever you need to do, like you have to be very, very, vigilant on every single job in this very, fluctuating economy right now. It's so important, that people know that and they watch that, and ultimately though, I mean, I think, the markets are cyclical. Obviously we're going through a very turbulent time right now, but I think it's just like you said, it's at the end of the day, it's the businesses that have built a solid foundation, built on, great teams, providing great customer service, answering the phones, being there for their customers, doing high quality work. I mean, those are the businesses that will be able to survive and weather the storm and will be here for the next, decades. And it's the people who are just, coming in trying to just win every deal at all costs, have no idea what their true numbers are. Those are the people, if you buy from them, you're likely, next time you have an issue, try to call them back, they're going to be
they're
gone.
gone, yeah.
It's the reputable businesses that are going to weather the storm here.
Building trust. I think that's the key to everything we're doing right now is we're even trying to build trust with our manufacturers so that when you do go back and you say, "Hey, this was an issue," they help you fix it. Building trust with our business partners, finding solutions to help us with efficiencies, and again, when you have a cost system inside of JobTread, it helps us stay on top of those changes, because any of us can get in at any point and look. It used to be an Excel spreadsheet, I mean, and we did a good job with it, but it was very cumbersome, and it's not anymore. So
Yep.
finding partners, earning trust, and then continuing to understand what that looks like for your customers, we're gonna be okay. It's a beautiful industry. Construction is a beautiful industry to be a part of, but it is changing and growing, and I just wanna be an exciting part of that, not looking at it as it goes over the mountain and leaves me behind.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you, Wendy, and how you have, again, gone above and beyond to take on, so many different roles, to be so active and involved in the community. And essentially, you are a great role model to so many other businesses that you probably don't even
Thank
know the
you.
impact that you have, by going, and spending so much time to help and share others. I mean, we need more people like you out there to help create this rising tide, as you mentioned earlier. It's one of my favorite quotes too.
Yep.
But like it's just like we need more people who are willing to share, open up, their books and say, hey, here are the challenges that we've had. Here's how we've overcome them. We've been through these tough times. We've seen, the markets go up, the markets go down. Here's how we weather the storm. I think as a community, by coming together, by working together, by collaborating, forming strong partnerships with the manufacturers, your vendors, your dealers, distributors, technology partners. Like, this is how we can, together make it through. And ultimately, like you said, I mean, literally every single structure in the entire world, it has a roof. It has to have a roof. It's not going anywhere. Construction is not going anywhere, and that is just a fact. And so it's all about, though, how do we, together, not let these tough times, cause us to make mistakes, to cut corners, to ultimately, deliver a subpar product. It's about, being able to adapt, to change, to put in the right systems, the right processes, and do right by our customers, do right by, those in the community. And I think when you do that, you build an everlasting business that will survive any challenge that comes. It's about, just continuing to, lead by example, lead, with the right intentions, do right. And, I think you're just a great testament to that. So I very much appreciate,
Thanks, Eric.
everything that you've done for us to help us continue improving, as well as just to inspire, motivate others out there to, to also lead by example.
Back at you, my friend. Back at you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you so much for coming on, for sharing this. Obviously, anyone who wants to connect with Wendy, she's very involved in a lot of things. Easy to find her. But again, I would highly recommend you check out the roofing technology think tank. RT3. They have a ton of awesome resources that can help you kind of go through some of these guides, learn how to evaluate software, learn more about AI. There's a lot of great tools out there. Also highly recommend the National Residential Roofing Committee, the NRCA. Got a lot of really, really valuable resources to get involved. I'm sure Wendy would help, love to help navigate you to get involved in either of
Anything I
those
can do.
organizations and all the other organizations you're involved in. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing today.
Thanks for the time, Eric. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.